That's
Yeah, we
9
need
minutes.
some sort of like write-up.
Yeah.
Come talk to me a little bit. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, go ahead and please take out your study guide from yesterday. I want to go over that really quickly, or well, not really. I want to go over it. Make sure we all got the correct answers. Kind of talk about it a little bit, and then we'll move on to. Good. How's that for 4-3? How far did you go? All right. So let's take a look at the study guide for today. I want to kind of go over our responses, make sure we got all the best information we can have, and then we're going to move on to the next thing we're doing. All right. So let's see. Key terms. Number one. Key term number one. Middle Kingdom. What do we have for Middle Kingdom? D. What do we have for Middle Kingdom?
A period of order and stability that lasted until about 1750 BC.
All right, a period of order and stability that lasted until about 1750 BC, correct? Okay. Anybody else have anything else to add to that? No? All right. Let's go with number two. Number two, the Middle Kingdom. Middle Kingdom. Oh, I'm sorry. New Kingdom. Sorry, we said Middle Kingdom. New Kingdom. Sorry, I read there. New Kingdom. Brooke.
A period during which Egypt used to fight power and
Okay. Period in which Egypt reached the height of its power and glory. Did we have any dates associated with that one? With the New Kingdom? Danny, did you have anything else?
I had it lasted from 1550 BC to 1550 BC.
Okay. And that's actually I want you to go ahead and put, because it's right here. Go ahead and take down the. I want you to add to whatever definition you have there for New Kingdom the dates that we have here on our map, which is from 1570 to 1070 BC. Now, as we talked about, with some of these dates, these are circa dates. We don't have an exact date specifically. We don't know. We don't believe that the New Kingdom started on October 13th of 1070 or 1570, and it ended on September 9th of 1070. We don't necessarily know that specifically. We just know that it's about that time. About that time. Okay. All right. Everybody got those new dates added? Yes. 1570 to 1070. All right, what about trade routes? What are trade routes? Colin.
Paths followed by traders.
Paths followed by traders, right? Make sure that you have traders and not traitors, because those are two different types of people. Okay? Traders and traitors. You want traders. They were people who traded things. All right? Traded things. Next one. Queen Hatshepsut. Aditi. Okay, one more time, just a little bit louder. Okay, ruler who worked to increase Egyptian trade. What else do we know about her? Actually, what else do we know about her?
She's remembered for her impressive monuments and temples built during her reign.
Okay, impressive monuments and temples built during her reign. Brenna, what else?
She acted like a male pharaoh.
She acted like a male pharaoh, not just acted like one, but dressed like one. Remember how I told you guys a couple of weeks ago that there was, I had thought that it was an Nefertiti, but I couldn't remember it specifically. There was one of the female rulers that would wear the chin beard, right? She would put on a fake chin beard and she would wear it just like the pharaohs would. That was Queen Hats. Queen Hatshepsut, the Hatshepsut. Or Hatshepsut. I got it. mention these names at some point in time. Huh? Last one, Ramses the Great. Ramses the Great. What do we know about Ramses the Great? Why was he so great? Brooke? Julie, what do we know about Ramses the Great? I mean, other than what Brooke said, because I obviously don't say what Brooke said, because you heard what she said, and she answered the question really well. But what else do we know about it?
That,
Yes.
okay, he defeated the Hittites.
That would be what Brooke said. What else do we know about it?
He had a long reign
Okay.
in Egyptian history.
Longest reign in Egyptian history. There we go. That's something new we don't know about him. Longest reign in Egyptian history. He defeated the Hittites. He defeated the Hittites, not the Hittites. It's the Hittites.
Why is it spelled like that? Looks like he.
It's not. It's Hittites. I'm telling you how it's pronounced. It's Hittites.
Why is there a second Achilles?
It's Hittites.
Okay.
It's not Hittites.
Okay.
Yes. What else do we know?
He also fought off the Tahiti.
Okay. He also fought off the Tahino. He did a lot of great things. He fought off the Tahino. He beat the Hittites. He had the longest reign in Egyptian history. He also, what else do we know about him from like earlier? He also did a lot of other things too. Brooke, what else did he do? Okay, built walls, protection, forts. He also built a lot of temples, a lot of palaces, put a lot of statues of himself everywhere. Because you can do that when you're great. Put a lot of statues and stuff. In fact, there are so many statues of Ramses all throughout Egypt that most of the time, whenever you see a picture of a pharaoh, the probability is that it is Ramses. And a very high probability that it's Ramses that you're looking at. Why? Because he put his statues everywhere. Everywhere. He really liked himself.
So he was conceited.
He had a pretty good reason to be. He had a pretty good reason to be. He did a lot of great things. Let's see. All right, so we talked about Ramses. Let's move on. How did Amosa manage to become king of all Egypt? Nathan.
He drove the
Hyksos.
Hyksos out of Egypt, and once they were gone, he declared himself king.
Okay, he drove the Hyksos out of Egypt and then declared himself king. That easy, right? It's that easy. He just walked in, drove them all out, said, nah, now I'm king. That'd be like if, I don't know, Nathan came in one day and kicked all the teachers out and said, nah, I run this school now. Alright? That's basically what he did. Would it be all that easy?
Yeah.
Not necessarily, but once there was nobody there to oppose him, he ruled. Okay. Next question. Which group of invaders did Ramses the Great defeat? Manali. He did defeat the Hittites, but there's one other one that I'm really looking for. The other group I'm really looking for. Tori. The Tehenu. The Tehenu. He formed a peace. He defeated the Hittites, but he also formed a peace treaty with them, right? But the Tehenu he drove out, he got rid of. Tehenu, I think?
Yeah.
Tehenu. Okay. Let's see, next question. What did Queen Hats do as Pharaoh of Egypt? What did she do? Aditi, give me one thing she did. Okay, she sent traders all over the place, north and south, to trade with a bunch of different people. What else did she do? Brooke, what's something else she did?
She sent Asia and Greece.
Okay, they went all over Asia and Greece. What else did she do? Nathan.
She used the wealth that they got to support art and architecture.
Okay, so she used the wealth that they got from all this trade to, instead of building like a stronger military or building, I don't know, more palaces, instead she used it for art and architecture to make things more beautiful for the people. Anything else that she did? Did she do anything else? Huh? She put up stone monuments of herself. She built a temple to herself, for herself, right? She put up things so that she would be remembered. She wanted to be remembered. And was she successful?
Yes.
Yes. We're still talking about her today, a couple of thousand years later. Her legacy, her name lives on. She built temples to herself so that we would still be talking about her at some point in time, so that people would still remember her name. Let's see, next one. What do you think is a more reliable source of wealth? Trade or payments from conquered kingdoms? Which one's more reliable? Logan.
They would have more resources. They could get what they could trade. Maybe people about trade certain things they would conquer kingdoms you can ask for anything.
Okay. Actually, what do you think?
I think God's side of the spectrum, I think trade is more efficient, or because it helps out both parties involved, not just one. And so then you would get continued support from both parties helping out each other. Because if you conquer a kingdom, they may rebel against you.
It is, trade is mutually beneficial. Anybody else have an idea? Switch up. What do you think?
I said trade because you can trade stuff you have a lot of, and then you get more of a trade, and then eventually you get more money off of that because that you get more.
Okay. Nathan, what were you going to say?
Trade because I'm guessing that they won't conquer the kingdoms like very often.
Okay.
So trade is like a steady income that
Okay.
is happening all the time.
No, there were a lot of places, and they did this very often, when you would conquer someone, they would have what they would call a tribute, or a yearly tribute. And once you conquered a place and you were in charge of them, they had to pay you or give you a certain amount every year, or every how often you decided, to help you, or, as a way of saying thank you for not killing all of us, basically. How many of you guys have ever seen the movie A Bug's Life? Okay, Brielle, tell me what happens in A Bug's Life. What's going on in the story?
Well, all the ants have to rest for the year to give to grasshoppers.
Right. We have basically our story of our conquered kingdom here. We have our group of people, the ants, right? They're their own little kingdom. They have a queen. They sort of run their own thing. They're doing their own thing. And I'm sure for one point in time, they never gave any food to the grasshoppers. They ran their own thing. They did their own thing. And the grasshoppers come along one day and conquer them. They threaten them. They might kill a couple of them. Hurt a couple of them. And they threaten them. They say, if you don't give us X amount of your grain, we'll kill all of you. We'll take away all of your land, and we'll take over. And so what do the ants do? They give in, and they give them some of everything. And that's what you see in these conquered lands. Egypt comes in, takes over, says you're going to give us X amount of your stuff every year, or every 6 months, or ever how often. You're going to give it to us. And the people who've just been conquered, they say, okay. As long as the grasshoppers don't make any unrealistic demands, the ants pay. But at some point in time, something happens in the story which causes the grasshoppers to start asking for more. More than what they should be asking for. More than what they've normally asked for. And it makes things harder for the ants. They can't possibly come up with enough. They can't make enough. And it becomes a problem. And then they do exactly what our trade people were talking about. They end up rebelling against the grasshoppers. Do the grasshoppers get any more grain after the ants rebel? No. So now the grasshoppers have to go out and either find a different way of getting grain, or they have to conquer somebody else, or go through the whole battle of conquering the grasshoppers or the ants again. So there are downsides to both systems though. In trade, you can only get what the other people are willing to give you. Let's say you want gold, but they don't want to give you gold. They only want to give you silver. You just have to take it. That's all they'll give you. You also have to pay them, especially if it's something that you need, you have to pay them whatever it is that they demand. I play a game on my tablet that I haven't played in a couple of days, and I need to go back and check. It's called Kingdoms. Has anybody ever played a game like this? You have to you build up your kingdom by building different things. And for everything you build, everything you do, you have to have certain supplies in order to do it. And if you don't have those supplies, you can't build anything. Well, eventually, as you get further on in the game, you can trade with other kingdoms to get these things. Well, I have a kingdom that has a lot of rock quarries, and so I can quarry a lot of rock and give it to people. But I don't have a lot of farms, so I can't get a lot of wheat. I don't have a lot of farms to have wheat, and so I have to trade my rock all the time for wheat. Now there's one guy in the game. He has a ton of wheat, tons of it, and he can demand any price that he wants for his wheat, and I have to pay it when my people are hungry. Little people, they walk around with these little angry clouds over their heads when they're hungry and they're mad, and they start burning down things. They start burning down villages and stuff. They get really mad. They try and raid my castle and stuff when they get really mad. It's crazy. And so I have to feed them, or else they'll tear apart my whole town. They're nuts. And I have to feed them, and so I have to get wheat from this guy. Well, if I want to build something like another storehouse or another farm, I actually need stone to do that. But I can't use up my stone because I'm too busy trading it to the guy over here who has all the wheat, because that's the price he's demanding. So trade can go one or two ways. I've actually thought if I could build an army in there, I just go take him over so I could have all this wheat. Because then it'd be easier. No, I don't have to worry about it. Trade has its downside. If you have something and you have a ton of it, you can demand almost any price from those people who don't have any of it. And they'll have to pay. So trade has its downside too. I don't know which one is actually better.
Check it out. Cheat codes.
Well, there's not a. I'm not talking about. I'm talking about in real life. All right. Next question. So let's move on to the next question. What job employed the most people in ancient Egypt? Nolly. Farmers and other peasants. For the same reason I just mentioned, with that game, you have to feed everybody. Everybody's got to eat. So even though you have irrigation and division of labor and all those things, people still have to eat. And the more people you have, the more food you need, and the more people need to work on that level. Let's see here. Oh, one other thing about that. If you were born a peasant, could you just one day become a scribe in ancient Egypt, or even pharaoh? Could you, or maybe even a priest? Could you go from being a peasant or a farmer to being priest? No. It wasn't like our society where you can go to school and everybody gets to go to school and you can do really well in school if you try really hard, and then you can get a scholarship to go to college and you can do really well in college if you work really hard, and then you can eventually get a really nice job, and you go from having absolutely nothing to having a nice job and having a nice life. Basically, if you were born a peasant and a farmer, you're going to die a peasant and a farmer. And your kids would die peasants and farmers. And your kids' kids would die peasants and farmers. There wasn't a whole lot of opportunity to move up into a different position. Yeah. Yes, but if I was a lowly farmer who claimed to be Pharaoh and God, I'm pretty sure they would just kill me. Yeah, Preston.
Wouldn't you move up with like a peasant marry somebody higher and then the kid would be higher?
It is entirely possible that a peasant girl could marry someone of a higher station, and that her children could move up the ladder. But for a peasant male to marry someone higher was very unheard of. Very unheard of. So if you were a girl, you had the possibility, a very slight, small possibility. And the reason why you only had a slight and small possibility is because there were these things called dowries. And you would basically, the parents of the female, of the girl, would pay the husband's family either large amounts of money or property or land to have the girl married to this guy, whatever the guy was, for whatever reason. So you wouldn't very often marry, if you were a wealthy family, you really wouldn't want to marry your son to a poor girl, because is she going to bring you anything? No, she has nothing to give you. She has nothing to give you, so you would not normally let that marriage happen. And if you were a guy, if you had a daughter or wealthy daughter, would you want to marry her to a guy who has nothing, and then all of a sudden he gets to be moved up to be somebody important? Not normally. You wouldn't do that. You'd want to marry her to somebody maybe a little bit higher up, or maybe on the same level, so you can keep things together. D. No. It's still, in some places, it's still a very common practice. And you have, here it was like the only way things were done. And so you didn't have a lot of opportunity to move up. It happened occasionally, but not very often. Okay, so let's see, let's move to the back page. Back page, question number 1. What rights did Egyptian women have? What rights did Egyptian women have? Kaylee.
Own property.
They could own property. This is huge. Kimberly. They can make contracts. Also huge. We're going to talk about all these in turn in just a minute. D. They can divorce their husbands. Was there anything else? There was one other one. Yeah, they could have jobs outside of the house. Was the other thing that they could do. So here's 4 big things. This is why this is so. These are huge. These are huge. You should all, every female in this room should say a gigantic thank you to the ancient Egyptians, because they set a precedent that was forgotten about for a long time and then reestablished. But they allowed you to be able to do things. Before that, before these ancient Egyptians came up with these rights for women, women were basically property that were owned by men. When you were born, you were owned by your father until you were old enough to be married, and then you were owned by whoever your father decided to marry you to. Okay? If your father decided to marry you to someone, remember we talked about the dowry, he would give a whole bunch of his stuff to your new husband to help take care of you. Now, if for some reason at some point in time your husband decided he didn't like you, he could divorce you, and you couldn't stop it. And as soon as he divorced you, because you were a woman, you had no right to own property. So how much of your stuff that your father gave to your new husband do you think you'd be able to keep?
None.
0. Which would leave you with what? Nothing. And you would be poor and homeless. Guess who would? And if you had kids, guess who got to keep your kids?
The man.
Your dad, your husband, unless they were all girls, then he didn't want them anyways because he didn't want to have to pay dowries for them, and so you would have to keep them. So now you're homeless, poor, with kids, living on the street. And you have no right to stop any of that. You can't go to someone and complain about it because you have no rights. You have none. 0. You can't do anything. You're stuck. That's the only thing you do. Now you are forced to be a beggar or some other horrible job that no one wants to do.
So you could just like get married to somebody, take a bit of time stuff, and then divorce them?
You had to have a legal reason to, but you could come up with almost any legal reason to. Like you could divorce. Let's say you got married, you had 3 kids, and they were all girls. You could divorce her because she didn't give you a son.
What?
Could you divorce her if she faked or she don't?
You could divorce her because let's say you got a cold, you got really sick one day. You could say that she's a witch, and that she put a spell on you and got you sick, and you could divorce her. You could divorce people for all kinds of different reasons. You just had to be able to prove it somehow. But you had to have a reason. You couldn't just be like, well, I don't like her anymore. All right, well, that doesn't necessarily work. But the best part is now you've got all her stuff. Guess what? You as a man are free to do. Marry somebody else. If you were a divorced woman, anybody want to guess how many people want to marry you?
0. That's right.
0.
You look like a horrible person.
0. So the ancient Egyptians came up with all these rights. Now a woman has the right to own property, which by itself is amazing because A, she doesn't have to get married to have a house of her own, to have her own things, to have stuff that belongs to her. She doesn't have to get married. So let's say you have only daughters. You have just maybe, let's just say, 1 daughter. Instead of having to now give all of my stuff to like my younger nephew, I could leave all of my property to my daughter. She could own everything. She could be the head of all of my property, of my estate. She can own property. She can make contracts, which means, how many of you guys here know for a fact that your mother either has a credit card, owns a car, or has a cell phone that are all in her own name? Yeah, none of that could happen without contracts. None of that could happen without contracts. You have to have a contract for all those things. In fact, as a teacher, I sign a contract every year saying that I will work here for a year and abide by certain rules of the school. Without this law that ancient Egyptians could sign contracts, women could sign contracts, there would be no female teachers in the school. Just be all us guys. I don't know how fun that would be for us, but it would be. But that's all it would be. You couldn't have contracts. You couldn't have cell phone. You couldn't have a car. You couldn't have a credit card. You couldn't own a house. You couldn't sign contracts. Okay. So you couldn't do any of those things. Now they could. Now they could sign contracts. They could agree to different things. They could set up shipping companies and do all these important things. And then finally, the last one, they could get divorces. So let's say you get married and your guy is not all that great of a guy. The guy that your father sets up for you to get married to is not all that great of a guy. He's like running around with all kinds of other girls on the side. You don't like that. He's not very good with his money. He spends all of his money at the wine shops, or or maybe he's out gambling all the time and he's spending all your dowry.
I don't think.
So now you can divorce him. You can say, you know what, he's not that good of a husband. I don't want to be married to him anymore. You can divorce him, and because you can keep property, you can keep all of your own stuff, and probably some of his too.
Huh.
So,
Suffer.
definitely things have changed and gotten better. All right, finally, last question. Why do you think the scribes were so honored in Egyptian society? Brenna, why do you think?
They recorded special events.
Okay, they recorded special events. Why else? Yeah, what?
They work for the government.
Okay, they work for the government and the temples? Actually, Rob.
Since they're the only ones who can read and write, they're the only ones with access to records.
Okay, they were the only ones who could read and write. They were the only ones who had access to records. Also very good. Sorry.
They didn't have to pay taxes, and which was an easier way to get rich. And they would work for the royals because they would write down most everything they would do.
Okay. Lots of great reasons why scribes should be considered important. All right, they have lots of good things. All right. I do have something for you guys to work on. We got about 12 minutes left. It should take you all about that time, maybe a little bit more. You probably will want to use your book. But while you were working on this, I'm going to pull up the video that we were watching yesterday, and we're going to keep watching that. So you can watch that while you're working. Pass those up for me. Yeah, you can pass those out to the other side. When you're done, just put them in that. Alright, the video is on.
The
Please
wall
listen,
of lists
listen as
of
much as you can while you're
Abydos
working.
tells us that 22 pharaohs had reigned over Egypt since Ora founded Memphis. But little more is known about them, beside their names and what they meant. One pharaoh's name would read Hotep Sekenwe, or God of Pleasing Powers. Another was Seth Peripsen, which
The
meant
only
simply
part that you don't have to
powerful
do is the
in
very
heart.
last question on the very back
What else
page
we
is
know
called
is that their
executive
burial
agreement. You don't
mastabas
have
would
to
be
do
built
that.
closer to the capital city Memphis. These grew more imposing in the
Yes,
mountains.
you don't have to
Some
do that.
reached 17 feet high with as many as 70 chambers. The construction of ever more elaborate monuments to these pleasing and powerful pharaohs indicates increasing confidence, wealth, and knowledge. The Egyptians soon developed new skills in building and architecture. A trend towards greater and greater beauty and excellence led here to Saqqara. Located south of the modern city of Cairo, this remarkable stone edifice is the funerary complex of King Djoser, the first pharaoh of the Third Dynasty. With the reign of Djoser, which began in about 2630 BC, the power of the pharaoh was absolute. Everyone, from the proudest administrator to the lowliest slave, was subject to his dictates. It was Djoser, whose name meant the most sacred one, that first began to explore the vast mineral wealth of the Sinai Peninsula that lay across the Gulf of Suez to the east. Here he would discover rich deposits of copper and turquoise that added to his wealth. He sent boats up the Nile to extend his rule and the borders of Egypt, as far south as Aswan. To proclaim his exalted status, Djoser commissioned the first pyramid ever built in Egypt, the Step Pyramid. 200 feet high, the towering six-tiered Step Pyramid dominates the horizon and the elaborate burial complex which surrounds it.
King Djoser's burial complex is very important because it is the first monumental building built entirely out of stone, the first time in history. Even more important, it gives us the idea of how a funerary complex is going to look like in Egypt from that time on.
As a burial monument, it was truly a staircase to heaven. As an architectural achievement, it pays homage to the pharaoh Djoser's mysterious chief architect and scribe Imhotep. An inscription from his period contained this tribute.
Seal bearer of the King of Egypt, one who is near the head of the king, director of the great mansion, royal representative, high priest of Heliopolis, Imhotep, the carpenter and the sculptor.
Imhotep, I suppose in a modern idiom, we call him the Leonardo da Vinci of ancient Egypt. He was brilliant. He was everything. He was second only to the king. He was the vizier, the chief statesman. He had many high titles. But who was he? We don't really know. All we know is his status at the time, that he was the genius who built the stone pyramid.
The tomb Imhotep designed for the pharaoh Djoser took the old mastaba form to new heights.
When we created the Acura RLX, we decided to take the other road. We believe luxury isn't about bling or flash. Courage invites critics. Go ahead. Future innovations are born from conversations, and sometimes the road that's less traveled is the one that surprises you. The Acura RLX.
Visit your local Acura dealer for attractive offers on the RLX.
Imhotep actually built 6 mastabas of diminishing size, one on top of another, by assembling hundreds of thousands of white limestone blocks. The result was a monument to his king that could be seen for miles on the desert horizon. The building of this first pyramid also coincided with Djoser's choice of the sun god Re as the country's dominant deity. To honor Re, The temples adjoining the pyramids would be built with their entrances toward the east to face the rising sun. The complex was enclosed by a wall 30 feet high, with many false entrances. This served as a symbolic setting for Djoser's Hebsed festival, a ceremony that celebrated the pharaoh as a magical symbol of fertility. It involved the pharaoh stepping through a ritual course that represented the four corners of Egypt. Inside one of the step pyramid's galleries, a relief depicts Djoser eternally stepping through the Hebsed festival as his court recited a pious incantation.
Lord of destiny, creating the plenteous harvest, pillar of the sky, support of the earth, leader who directs the two banks of the Nile. There is plenteous harvest wherever his sandals may be.
The Hebsed festival took place about every 30 years of reign of a particular pharaoh. And it was meant to be a rather civilized way of rejuvenating life in Egypt and prosperity, and to ensure that they would have this. In other cultures, very often, they would kill the king, and then there would be a new young king coming onto the throne, but the Egyptians did not do that. They had a ritual for rejuvenation, and the king would stay in power.
Djoser would reign for only 19 years, and we may never know whether his Hebsed court was ever used for the festival of his rejuvenation. We do know that when he died in 2649 BC, he had begun a legacy of pyramid building in ancient Egypt that would be copied and refined for 2,000 years. The name Snefru meant bringer of beauty, and his reign over Egypt would last 24 years. Snefru's predecessor Djoser had pushed the Egyptian border as far south as Aswan. Now Snefru sought to stretch his influence further, sending a campaign deep into Nubia to settle in the city of Wuhan. This was used as a base for mining expeditions, trade, and conquest. He is said to have returned with 7,000 captive Nubians, presumably to use as laborers, and 200,000 head of cattle. This carving celebrates a raid on turquoise mines in the Sinai Peninsula and depicts Snefru killing an enemy. Its inscription calls the pharaoh a great god who conquers the foreign lands. Another of the chief commodities sought by the pharaoh was timber. Much wood was needed to make furniture and provide beams for the homes of the wealthy. But such trees were scarce in Egypt, and the nearest source would require the Egyptians to travel by sea. The pharaoh ordered construction of 60 merchant ships. Soon there were fleets of graceful sailing vessels en route to Byblos in Lebanon. One of Snefru's scribes would record the bringing of 40 ships filled with cedar logs. Wall inscriptions from this time also tell us that Snefru awarded estates built of cedar logs and mud bricks to his high officials, but he was careful that they were widely separated to discourage them from banding together to form their own sub-kingdom. Still, the king found time to celebrate. By all accounts, life was sweet under Snefru's rule. Egypt in the 3rd millennium BC was a land of peace and plenty. Formal gatherings of nobles were hosted by the new pharaoh and his queen.